Marvel and DC Chaos, Dumbledore powers unleashed across universes. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 121. The night is not destined to be peaceful. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a big war is going on. On one side is the ancient Indian god of death summoned by Constantine, the Aztec, who wears a golden disc and has a skeleton-like body. On the other side are 5 hideous-faced demons of the beast-faced man. As for why the two sides fought, the former was tempted by Constantine, saying that there is a lot of energy to devour. The latter was deceived by Constantine into cooperating with the church against the water. After a great battle, the fire of the 5 demons was burned clean. The Grim Reaper Aztec ended up no better. Seriously injured, it crawled to Constantine's feet, wanting the other party to fulfill its promise to help him. But what was waiting was a magic impact that emitted a golden light, which was directly blasted into slag. Constantine did not intend to pay in the first place. God or demons are just tools that can be used. Half an hour later, Constantine, who completed the task, rushed to the Helm nightclub with Chas and the new plan. He knew that the scum of the demon Nilgai would never fulfill his promise, so he would play a bitter meat plan in a while. Once Nilgai catches and touches Chas, he can use a spell to unleash the power of his father's love to defeat him. The two planned seamlessly, confidently pushing open the door of the nightclub. But this time there seemed to be some silence and darkness inside. In this time period, it is obviously not normal. Be careful, the demon is cunning and vicious. It is likely that he made some kind of trap, Constantine whispered a reminder. Then the two cautiously and sneakily walked along the wall to the depths of the nightclub. Pushing open the last door, Constantine stepped out. The next second, he planted directly into the big pit, and at the same time did not forget to shout when he fell. There are traps, don't come in. Bang bang bang. After tumbling more than a dozen heels in a row, Constantine fell heavily on the bottom of the pit. Sure enough, as I thought, you didn't intend to fulfill your oath at all. Damn the devil. Constantine cursed while quickly getting up and making a magic shield on his body. But after waiting for a long time, no attack fell in the pitch-black space. Are you waiting for me to be careless? How could I be so stupid? Constantine sneered, looked up at the darkness above and shouted. Nilgai, have you been in the world for 10 years to play such a trick? Come out, I already know your purpose. As he spoke, he was ready to cast spells at any time. That's a spell that mimics opening hell and making illusions. He wants to see if he can threaten the other party with not being able to enjoy Los Angeles exclusively, and then he wants to return Tracy's soul. If not, plan for the next step. Syllable. The dazzling light came on, and Bruce lay on the second-floor fence while rubbing his eyes, and said speechlessly, Dude, what are you fighting with the air? He had been waiting for the other party here for a long time, and they were all asleep. Constantine was stunned by the white light. Who am I? Where am I? What about the demon Nilgai? Bruce shook his head helplessly, picked up the phone in his pocket and called. A few seconds later, a golden portal with sparks appeared. Bruce beckoned to Constantine and Chas. Follow me. More than 10 seconds later, Constantine looked at the corpse of the demon Nilgai in front of him stunned, and looked directly at the pair of pitch-black hollows, as if he could see the charred brain inside. This is dead? The source of his life's nightmare died like this? At this moment, he has a strong sense of unreality. Constantine stretched out his hand to touch the corpse to identify whether it was real or not, but the next moment he snapped it back. He looked at it in shock, and saw dozens of complex magic arrays on Nilgai's body that he couldn't understand at all, slowly moving between each other, exuding silver-white light. Especially the complex pattern and the combination that changes all the time. It simply dazzles him. That's called magic. For some reason, Constantine suddenly had such an idea in his heart. May I ask if the gentleman got my daughter's soul? At this time, Chas asked Bruce with an anxious look. At this moment, another portal appeared in the Bat Cave, opposite Chas's home. On the children's bed, a little girl is asleep, and from time to time, she still has some dream words in her mouth. It is clear that the girl's soul has been restored. Chase looked excited and said to Bruce, Thank you for me, sir. If there is anything I need to do in the future, I will definitely not refuse. After that, Chas couldn't wait to step over the portal and return home. Constantine followed and wanted to go in. Although magic is good, the other party has obviously had trouble coming to him before. And this magic boss is obviously more than one notch stronger than himself. He wants to hurry up. Besides, the fire demon is dead, and the great revenge must be revenged, and he must not take off in the next few days. But as if this scene had been expected, Bruce did not raise his head and said lightly, Mr. Russell said you have to stay. Of course you can try to go. Constantine's footsteps fell back to the same place, and after seeing the portal disappear, he turned and squeezed a smile at Bruce. I didn't want to leave in the first place, is it? That's great. A voice came from a distance, and Constantine turned his head to look and found that it was the big guy he guessed. Russell came over in his pajamas yawning and glanced at Constantine, who had a beard. Just 5 demons, why is it so slow? To put it lightly, that's not 5 ants. But Constantine thought about it, and those demons seemed to be like 5 ants to each other. Originally, he was still complacent about killing 2 groups of enemies with his brain, but at this time, his heart was devastated. Russell sat casually in a chair. Although he looked up, his lowered eyebrows seemed to be condescending, which put a lot of pressure on Constantine. Russell smiled and said, I helped you kill your lifelong enemy, how do you say you should thank me? Constantine first pretended to be embarrassed, and then gritted his teeth and said, I owe you a favor. If you find me for anything in the future, I can do it. He is confident in his performance. The tone is sworn and very convincing, and even many demons once believed him. But in the next second, he saw Russell slap his palm and said with a happy face, That's great. I need your help with something right now. Constantine trembled inexplicably, and his face was embarrassed. It's not that I don't want to help you now. It's just that defeating 5 demons just consumed a lot of my mana and energy, and now I'm really too weak, and not being in this state is likely to delay your business. Saying that, his eyes darkened, and he gasped slightly with a tired face. Well, how about I take a day off to recover my energy, and then I'll help you the day after tomorrow. Don't worry, you are so kind to me, I won't run. Russell waved his hand suddenly. It's all brothers, where can I make you tired? I asked you to help, just need you to sit still. If you need to do something, I'm not human. Hearing this, Constantine touched his head. It's okay to help it as simply. And next time, the other party will not be able to find themselves with favors, but it is very cost-effective. That's no problem, it's completely fine with my current physical strength. Constantine's eyes once again showed some brilliance, and the person seemed to be in spirit. That's great. Russell looked delighted. By the way, I don't know what you're going to do, dude. Constantine asked curiously. Russell showed his white teeth and smiled. It's not a big deal at all, it's just using you as bait to catch the devil. I heard you're very popular in hell. Episode 122. Constantine turned white with fright. He was really scared. The demons who have been pitted by him over the years are not 1,000, at least 800. He has so much magic at this age, most of them are borrowed from these victims, and the minimum return period is more than 1,000 years. As for the transactions of other empty gloves white wolves, there are countless more, so God knows how high his bounty is now in hell. I'm afraid it's not a call. Tens of thousands of demons are scrambling to crawl out, wanting his soul. As if having seen the terrifying scene of that moment, Constantine snorted violently and said in alarm, I'm sorry, I suddenly remembered that I haven't taken the psychiatric pill today, so I have to go back first. I'll help you tomorrow. When the words fell, Constantine burst out his magic with all his strength, jumped backwards sharply, and jumped backwards into the teleportation vortex. The next moment, he plopped down on the ground and looked at the pink rabbit slippers in front of him with a confused look. Why did he feel that this was somewhat familiar, as if he had just seen it? Constantine followed the perspective and looked up, and suddenly saw a familiar face. Russell looked down slightly. Don't get me wrong, this is Bruce's taste, and the new slippers that he has not opened at home are all this. But to be honest, in fact, I didn't expect a macho man like him to like this style. Russell turned his head to look at Bruce, who was pretending to be cold, and then raised his foot. Great Mr. Dark Knight, what is this rabbit called? Af you bought it, I don't know. Bruce replied without changing his face and without a heartbeat. Bang! Trying to escape, Constantine fell to the ground again from the air and once again saw the rabbit slippers in front of him. I know what it's called, can you release me, big guy? Constantine wanted to cry without tears, knowing that he could not run away without the permission of the other party. He couldn't even understand how the other party changed the position of the other end of his portal. Russell patted Constantine's shoulder and said in the expectant gaze of the other party, one must learn to look forward, Constantine. So do you choose to be beaten up by me and thrown up, or sit on it yourself? Russell was a little sorry, and the other party chose the first one. Constantine got up and turned around and ran, throwing out some props and magic at the same time, but it didn't work at all. Constantine found that he couldn't move a single bit no matter how he ran. The surrounding space is strangely stretching forward, and I am like standing on a treadmill. The next moment, a hand patted his shoulder. Constantine turned his head and entered into a fist the size of a sandbag. Don't punch in the face. It's late. 10 minutes later, Russell looked at the familiar pig's head and clapped his hands in satisfaction. The next moment, he stretched out his hand and expanded it forcefully. In an instant, the Batcave quickly disintegrated like computer synthesis, revealing a strange world that was rapidly deforming. After confirming that the sealing magic could preserve the demon corpse, he opened the mirror space and waited for Constantine to come over. Russell took Bruce to the skies. The ground below suddenly twisted, forming a huge summoning altar of more than 10,000 meters, with Constantine as the center. Fake. Constantine looked at the godlike power around him stunned, and he was completely dumbfounded. Who calls this a magician? Who is he anxious about? Don't worry, Constantine, if you put your heart down, I won't let you have an accident. Russell looked down and comforted. Think about it, after such a time, those demons will have to weigh it if they want to settle accounts with you in the future. No need to thank me. Constantine wanted to curse, but found that his tongue had struck a joint at an unknown time. At this time, as soon as he opened his mouth, he was like a fool, but he didn't dare to move anymore. A huge summoning array on the altar had lit up, and the sulfur-like hellish aura had already come out. An inverted triangle of golden symbols appeared on Russell's forehead in the sky, and his eyes were filled with golden light. At this time, his voice carried an indescribable seductive power, which was the seductive magic from the Bone King. Demons from hell, at the cost of Constantine's flesh and soul, I summon air and others to slaughter the world with blood. As the sacrifice was spoken, invisible fluctuations invaded hell through the summoning array. The next moment, huge magma gaps cracked on the altar, and the furious hell power burst out from inside. Constantine, Consi, one after another with excited whispers came from the cracks of hell, and those demons who had not yet arrived could not wait to taste Constantine's flesh and blood with the taste of fear. But at this moment, there was a scream in the gap. When the demons discovered that they were not the only one who was summoned, they immediately started fighting. Russell had already expected it, and suddenly increased the output of mana, and the hell crack expanded again. The passage became wider, the resistance became smaller, and suddenly a large number of demons frantically poured outward in order to prevent Constantine from being rushed out. For a while, the huge altar became extremely terrifying. Demons crawl out of the cracks, like ants out of their nests. Then like a tide, Constantine rushed towards the center of the altar with a look of excitement. Constantine looked desperate. Wouldn't he be dead and lifeless in this situation? He regretted it immensely. After killing the devil, he was still careless, so confident that he ran to the other party's territory. It's a pity that he can't even destroy his soul now, and he can only watch the demons fiercely pounce. Suddenly, Constantine saw a blue halo light up on the ground more than 10 meters around him. In an instant, a picture that he will never forget in his life appeared. All the demons that stepped over the aura instantly stiffened like statues, covered with white frost, and then automatically hung upside down and flew towards the sky. And the demon tide is dense, and the rear does not know what is happening at all. They only know that in perception, Constantine is still alive, so they run forward desperately. So Constantine saw wave after wave of demons, former servants smiling viciously and becoming ice sculptures, and then hanging in the sky. It's even scarier than a horror movie. At this moment, looking at the incomparably terrifying unknown power in front of him, Constantine felt a tingling in his scalp. He finally knew what the other party was going to do. It was something that had never happened since ancient times. Harvest the demons with bait. One stubble, another stubble. In just 1 minute, at least hundreds of thousands of demons died. The latter is, the cracks tremble. Some demons who were affected by the hell barrier and were more suppressed, because of their strength, began to come. They stretch out their huge and pale claws from the magma, grasp the edge of the gap, and pull out their bodies with force. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of hideous and terrifying huge demons walked onto the altar. They easily notice something unusual in the sky, but they don't care about it. Stupid humans dare to calculate demons, and even dare to let go of all their restraints and let them descend with all their power. I don't know if I'm alive or dead. Constantine swallowed his spit fiercely, only to think that Russell was crazy. He originally thought that Russell would set up requirements, all summoned ordinary demons. But now, each of these hundreds of great demons has a power that is no lower than that of the fire demon Nilgai. This shows that Russell did not make any restraints on the summoning contract at all. Or maybe the one who can come is even more terrifying. The great demons also saw the summoner in the sky at this time, and immediately showed a vicious smile. They don't do stupid things like cannibalism. And now the most important thing is not Constantine. His summoning contract is to slaughter the world. Solve that summoner, and we can stay on Earth forever. Eat its soul and make the contract irreversible. For a while, the big demons looked at the sky with a sinister smile. And Constantine, who heard this, suddenly despaired. That powerful mage is out of play. But at this moment, he saw that Russell's face was still calm. Constantine's eyes widened sharply, and an idea appeared in his mind that even he couldn't believe. But how is that possible? But just then, the night sky lit up. Owie frost. As an indifferent word fell, Constantine saw that he didn't even dare to imagine, and the blue magic array with a diameter of 10,000 meters instantly took shape. Then from inside fell an ice blue torrent. The world seemed to fall silent at this moment. Everything touched by the ice blue is frozen, as if time stands still. Whether it's a sneering demon, or a magic unleashed, or an erupting flame, even a huge hellish crack in the ground, everything is extinguished and frozen, falling into eternity. Constantine felt as if his sanity was shattered at this moment. Russell's strength broke his stereotypes again and then crushed into scum. Everything that is impossible has become possible. At this moment, a sentence instinctively echoed in Constantine's mind. Is this really human, or is he God? Episode 123. The icy cold air lingered, and large expanses of silver-white frost shimmered in the starlight. Constantine looked up at the sky, and at this moment he could no longer describe his mood with shock. I saw that the sky that should have been empty had been occupied by countless upside-down demon corpses. Their bodies are covered in white frost. Fear in the eyes. The dead body radiates despair. Constantine dared to swear that such a terrifying picture would not appear even in hell. Nice picture. It will definitely look good when painted in oil. After commenting, Bruce looked at Russell and asked again, "Can I lie again?" Because of the shock, Bruce is somewhat numb now. So at this time, his first reaction was whether he could have another wave of demons, and it would be better if he could slaughter them all. Nice suggestion. Russell drew the scoop according to the gourd and once again opened the summoning array. I don't know if the devil is not afraid of death, or if he is not very well informed. Soon, another wave of demons crawled out of the summoning formation. Then came the third, fourth, fifth. There are fewer demons every time. By the sixth time, a breeze blew through, and the summoning array did not respond. The Constantine people have been completely stupid, with a bad expression on their faces. It's outrageous. This directly scrapped a demon summoning magic that has been circulating for an unknown number of years, and it can really record the history of magic. Don't think about it, summoning demons will definitely become more cumbersome and more restrictive in the future. At this moment, Constantine suddenly thought of something, and immediately laughed excitedly. He suddenly found that the debt he owed didn't seem to have to be paid. 99% of those demons who had been deceived by him were dead, and the rest did not dare to come to his trouble. I'm free. Constantine felt extremely relaxed at this moment, and happily wanted to find the nightmare nurse to discuss the philosophy of life. But at this moment, suddenly a voice with a smile echoed in the mirror space. I don't think so. In the next second, the extinguished summoning array automatically lit up and ran. On the altar, the stairs of the first step collapsed down I don't know how deep, and it was extremely dark. At this time, a footstep slowly sounded from far and near inside. A few seconds later, a tall and handsome man in a suit walked out from inside. He tightened his tie and smiled at Constantine in front of him. Ah, Constantin. I think the truth may be a little bit different from what you think. Don't you know that all the uncollected debts in hell actually belong to me? So, unfortunately, I will be your creditor from today onwards. Constantine looked at the man in front of him with a smile frozen on his face, and almost fainted directly. How is this possible? This must be God kidding me today. How else would this man come out? At this moment, under the great joy and sorrow, he had the feeling that he had lost his perception of his body and would ascend his soul to heaven at any time. Russell's face in the sky was also not very good looking. He already recognized who the person in front of him was. Lucifer, Morningstar, the famous fallen angel and the Lord of Hell, Satan. But Russell couldn't figure out why the other party came out of hell. The current situation is completely beyond his plan. Russell is lying to say that he is not nervous. After all, this is a real big guy. At his peak, even removing Lucifer, the authority of hell, was outrageously strong. If the magic power of an ordinary demon counts as 1, the Demon King level is more than 1,000, which is the more than 100 great demons that Russell killed at the beginning. And the top demon kings, such as the first fallen and the 3 palace devils, are properly more than 10,000. But Lucifer counted both the real body and the doppelganger, and it exceeded 1 million. If you count his authority as Satan you do, it would be even more outrageous in hell. And converted to the Marvel world, Lucifer will guarantee that he will be a multiverse-level powerhouse, or even higher. Russell glanced at Constantine, who was pretending to be dead. It was a pity that Lucifer did not owe this favor at this time. That will not happen until the future when Constantine helps Mez, who defected to the devil. But the next moment, he saw Lucifer looking at him and said, I guess you must be thinking about that favor. In fact, I owe it now. Saying that, Lucifer smiled. I originally thought it was the timeline that the kid with the divine speed power came back to disturb, but I didn't expect it to be. Oh. Forgot to tell you, the timeline can't interfere with me after I get to this point. Russell narrowed his eyes slightly. Lucifer didn't have to lie at all, and this showed that he underestimated the other party even more. Russell's heart sank slightly. In the end, it's still careless. This matter should wait for 30 days of CD crossing talent to do it, and you can run directly when you encounter danger. But Russell didn't beat himself up. It may not be without a glimmer of life right now. He also has a magic weapon at the bottom of the box. Super magic, make a wish to the stars. While there is no world-class item ring to resist negative effects, it is likely that the negative effects will also have a positive effect. He planned that Lucifer would show malice once he showed his malice. Immediately wish that Darkseid's true body would come here because of an accident that broke the world. At the same time, I made a wish for the second time. Barry Allen of the Origin Universe crossed the timeline and had an accident and also came here. Next is the third wish. The Supreme Superman broke open due to an accident. Oh. Lucifer pressed down with both hands, revealing an incredulous look of you are so ruthless, and hurriedly stopped. I have no ill will towards you at all. Don't get excited. Seeing that Russell was still looking at himself nervously, Lucifer helplessly took a step back. In an instant, countless Lucifer appeared from his body and retreated from the stairs back to hell. After doing all this, Lucifer's breath was already 1,000 times weaker, and then he looked at Russell without a good air. Is this all right? Feeling the power fade and the space no longer tremble, Russell is indeed not so nervous. But he was even more puzzled by what Lucifer meant. Lucifer also tilted his head and said with a puzzled face, what the hell, didn't the old man reveal more information to you? Old man? Does it mean God? Russell felt as if the other party had misunderstood something. Lucifer narrowed his eyes slightly, a little excited in his heart, and seemed to know nothing. Time, that's it. X2. Russell smiled slightly. I'm currently dusting my memory for some reason, perhaps. You can solve my confusion. Lucifer smiled and shook his head. It's all trifles. I have a better idea now. Russell blinked, revealing a curious gesture. What idea? Lucifer smiled wickedly. What if I say, how about making you Satan? Episode 124. What did I hear? Lucifer is going to give up Satan's place? Constantine was stunned, his mouth was open, and at this moment he seriously doubted whether he was still falling in that big pit. Maybe he is in a fantasy realm, otherwise how can he explain all this? After all, this is even more outrageous than being able to go to heaven after death. Bruce in the sky was also in a trance. Listening to the conversation, he already understood what kind of existence the big guy in front of him was at this time. That's Satan. In mythology, it is the existence of God. Although there may be some discrepancies in reality, it is definitely an existence at the top of this world. Bruce turned to look at Russell. He suddenly felt that everything he had seen before was still superficial. The true identity of this angel may be far deeper and more terrifying than he thought. Russell didn't care what Batman thought of himself. He looked at Lucifer, who had a sincere face, and suddenly had an incredible thought in his heart. That is, Lucifer does not seem to lie, but really wants to make himself Satan. Will there be pie in the sky in the world? If there is, it must be poisonous. So it seems that there are still some hidden secrets about Satan's position. Russell muttered slightly for a second before revealing a smile. He did not refuse or agree, but changed the subject and asked, I don't know why Mr. Lucifer came here this time. Lucifer was not upset that Russell did not agree, and did not seem surprised by this result. Then he touched his chin and thought for a while before saying, I don't want to tell you the specific reason, but you can't keep the corpse of the demon like this in the future. This is the last time. Russell's expression remained unchanged, but he heard another meaning. This sentence can be understood as saying that demons can be killed, but they cannot be preserved like him so that the power is not lost. Could it be that hell needs the return of demonic power? Russell could only think of this possibility for a while, otherwise the other party really didn't need to come up. But why is that? Lucifer didn't tell me because it involved Satan's secrets? Suddenly, Russell thought of an existence under hell. Although his knowledge of DC Comics is seen from some videos, he belongs to the type of half-understanding. But the one under hell is so famous. Giant beast. That is the opposite of God, or it can also be called the Great Black Sky. It is rumored that the other party is the darkness before the birth of the universe, and God is the first white light. Now the other party seems to be sleeping at the bottom of hell. So it seems that Lucifer's fallen to hell to become Satan seems to be God's plan? Before Russell crossed, he had heard someone joke that hell and heaven were one family. Now it seems that if you don't get it right, this may be true. So Lucifer really wants to pick and choose and find a new hard work? Russell's expression was natural, did not show a trace of abnormality, and replied with a smile. Mr. Satan, rest assured, I will not slaughter demons again in the future. Anyway, it can't be summoned anymore, and it doesn't hurt to promise it. Lucifer nodded, and the next second his temperament suddenly changed, revealing a smile that was difficult to understand. Tell me, what do you desire most? Russell's expression was a little dazed for a moment, and instinctively spoke. I want the world. This world. Lucifer's eyes became deeper and his smile even worse. How do you want the world? I want. The world turns into a donut sprinkled with gummy bears. Mr. Satan, can you satisfy me? Russell's eyes were full of clarity, and he asked with a smile. There is the Bone King's sanity magic, the Astral Mage's mechanical mind, and Dumbledore's brain occlusion. Lucifer, who is in his current state, wants to seduce him, and it is a fool's dream. Lucifer smiled awkwardly. Maybe you can ask God if this wish can be fulfilled. In the next second, he put his fingers together, condensed a card between his fingers, and then flew down in front of Russell at random. But little angel, if you figure it out one day and want to be Satan, you can come to me. Lucifer smiled and waved his hand, turned and walked down the stairs. The altar was restored and Russell breathed a sigh of relief. This means that the other party is really gone. Only then did he look at the card in front of him. It is a palm-sized card with a demon, in a suit, playing the piano. You don't need to touch Russell to feel a unique power sealed inside, both evil and sacred. After thinking about it, Russell still chose to accept it. His idea is still very simple. When he encounters someone who can't be beaten, disaster leads to disaster. In the midst of hell, Lucifer sneezed. It's strange that one of my siblings is starting to think about me, hopefully not Aminadial. Lucifer looked around sneakily, and after finding that the time flow rate was normal, he was immediately relieved. Then he took a step forward and returned to the throne of his palace of Satan. Then he couldn't wait to grab it forward, and suddenly a beautiful-looking punishing demon with a wheat complexion, 2 horns on his head, and wings on his back was pulled out. Master. The punishing demon with the leather whip immediately knelt on the ground and bowed his head. Lucifer showed an excited smile and said, I'm going to go to Earth 666 for a vacation. Metz, you come with me. So what about here? Mez looked dazed. Satan is gone, and hell is prone to chaos. Lucifer got up, leaving another closed self on the throne. I will keep the authority, and no one will find out for a short time. Besides, it's a perfect time loop, no one will find a new. Oh, I won't tell you about this. Lucifer's eyes flickered, and he obviously had a different plan in mind. Then he laughed proudly twice and left hell, directly with me eyes. Inside the mirror space, Russell made a new pocket space. Only the palm-sized transparent 30-hexahedron is stuffed with all the demons. Then he used sealing magic to block the passage of all power, and when his palm turned over, the pocket space suddenly disappeared. The next moment, Russell unravels the mirror space. With the sound of glass shattering, golden sunlight came into view. Not at night. Russell narrowed his eyes slightly at the strange scene in front of him. He turned around and found that Bruce Wayne and Constantine were indeed not behind him. Did Lucifer do it? Why do you want to do this? Russell shook his head and flew in one direction at random. It's useless to be anxious now. Let's look at the world first. Not long after, Russell stopped looking at a church below. He felt as if he had seen this place. Episode 125. Squeak. The old-fashioned white church door was pushed open, and a dusty traveler entered. The traveler looked up. Inside the church, afternoon light pulls out several dusty pillars of light through the glass, and the statue of Jesus hides in the deep shadows. Anyone? The traveler shouted. The sound echoed. It seemed that the sound of something falling sounded on the second floor, and a few seconds later a messy man with a scrambling footstep and a wine bottle in his hand appeared at the edge of the fence on the second floor. After the man took another sip of spirits, he burped contentedly before looking down. There are still travelers coming to this dilapidated place. Are you a believer? The man asked while picking his boogers. Russell nodded and made a reverent cross gesture. May the Lord be with you. After the blessing, he smiled again and asked, is the priest here there? The man did not wonder why the other party saw that he was not a priest, and it would be good that he was not treated as a homeless man. If you don't dislike it, just wait here for a while. He went to the town to solve the confusion of the believers, and it is estimated that he will be back in the afternoon. Saying that, the man also raised the wine bottle in his hand and said, would you like some? The whiskey here is really strong. Russell shook his head. No thanks, I'll just sit here. By the way, can I ask what the priest here is called? Maybe we have met and said it is not certain. The man suddenly laughed. His name is Jesse, but I think you haven't met before. His previous profession is special. If gangsters count as a profession. The man thought in his heart while laughing. Russell nodded, and now he could be sure. Jesse is Jesse Custer, and the man in front of him is not a human, but the vampire Cassidy. This is the world of missionary, also belongs to one of the DC universes, and most importantly, there really is a god here. But after seeing Lucifer's strength, Russell had some doubts about the authenticity of this god, because he could not resist the power of Genesis, born from the union of demons and angels. So, is this god false, or is it just a doppelganger? And most importantly, why did you come to this world? Russell walked into the sunlight in a few steps, raised his right palm, and looked calmly at the bored vampire lying on the fence. I have another question that I need you to answer for me. Cassidy was stunned for a moment. He felt that the other party's temperament seemed to have changed, and there was an indescribable feeling at this time. Cassidy slowly took 2 steps back and said somewhat cautiously, what are you going to ask? Russell didn't raise his head, just looked at the palm of his hand and said, has an exorcist found you in the past 2 days? You're an exorcist too. Cassidy's face changed, and he turned around and ran towards the house. The gun he had seen Jesse had seen was in a drawer, but in the next second, the whole church lit up. Russell's palm seemed to have a new round of sun, bright orange and yellow, dispelling all shadows in the church. Cassidy instantly screamed, and his body seemed to be burned by hot oil, and he fell to the ground and kept rolling. Sunshine. How can it be? This is the first time he has encountered someone who can control the sun, and he is simply a vampire's nemesis. Russell was unhurried and walked step by step to the second floor. It wasn't until he walked up to the vampire who was already on fire that he withdrew the sunlight in his hand. I didn't mean to kill you. So, can you tell if 2 exorcists have found you now? Cassidy was very heartfelt, screaming and nodding sharply. Yes, just the night before yesterday, I met 2 exorcists at the cemetery. He only said half of the words, and did not dare to say that these 2 people had been killed by himself. Russell didn't care. He just wanted to make sure of the timing. Now that the 2 angels had come to the door, Jesse should have obtained the power of Genesis at this time. As a power of speech, Russell was indeed interested in Genesis, but Genesis also has a clear weakness. That is, once you can't understand or hear what the owner says, then it won't take effect. And it's not exactly what you say. There is no effect on inanimate things, and there will be no saying let there be light, and night will become day. However, Russell's purpose in determining the point in time is not only Genesis, but also, oh, God. The afterglow of the sun shone on the plain, and the church pulled out a long shadow. Not long after, an old car pulled up in the doorway, and Jesse walked down from it with a shocked look in his eyes. Just now, he forcibly ordered a man to put a pistol in his mouth, and the other party could not do the slightest resistance except for pleading with his eyes. At this time, Jesse looked at the church in front of him and finally came to his senses. For some reason, he now strongly wants to pray to God to describe his current confusion. Pushing open the church door, Jesse's face changed instantly. He saw a strange man sitting on a bench, Cassidy's charred body at the other party's feet. Jesse's eyes instantly showed a furious look. Although he and Cassidy have only known each other for 3 days, but after the other party helped him and then squatted in prison together, he already regarded the other party as his friend in his heart. Now, someone dares to kill in his church. Hey Jesse, you're back. Cassidy raised his scorched black blood-oozing terrifying face and showed a row of white teeth to say hello. Jesse, who was planning to avenge his good brother, was almost scared out of pee by this scene. What is this thing? Syllable. Suddenly, a snap of fingers appeared, and all the candles in the church suddenly burned at the same time, releasing a dim light. Khaleesi jerked her head down and pretended to be dead, while Jesse gave a shocked look. Although he also has special abilities now, the scene in front of him is still very terrifying. Who are you? Jesse asked nervously, but did not use special powers. At this time, he was not used to it, and he did not want to use it. And at this moment, he saw the other party slowly stand up from the bench, smile and stretch out a finger to put on his lips. Shoo, talking is forbidden here. In an instant, the space shifted. The whole church is filled with seawater, and there is no trace of air. The candles are still burning eerily, illuminating the dark underwater world. Jesse's eyes were full of fear at this moment, and his hands kept struggling. He couldn't breathe and couldn't speak. Russell floated calmly in the water, smiling at the man in front of him who looked exactly like the King of Stormwind. At this time, chains appeared, wrapped around Jesse's limbs. Russell raised his right hand, and more than a dozen slowly rotating magic arrays appeared on his entire arm. The next moment, his entire palm sank into Jesse's chest. Less than a second later, a cloud of transparent power was held by Russell in his hand. This is Genesis. In an instant, the space changed again. The sea receded, the air returned, and Jesse lay on the ground and gulped. But at this time, looking at Russell's eyes, only fear and shock remained. He knew that this kind of power would definitely not be possessed by humans. Cassidy, a well-informed vampire who has lived for hundreds of years, also felt his scalp numb, only to feel that the exorcist in front of him was becoming more and more terrifying. Toot toot. A knock suddenly sounded at the door. Two men in suits and briefcases walked in expressionlessly, but the next moment, the two stared at Russell's palm with a look of surprise, and said one by one, "Give it to me. Now, immediately." Russell tilted his head slightly and asked calmly, "Why?" The two said in unison, "Because we are angels." Russell nodded slightly. "Is there any evidence?" The short man shook his head. "An angel is an angel." The tall man nodded. "Angels don't need proof." Russell shook his head in denial. "I think there is still a need for evidence, such as this one." In an instant, a pair of wings spread out from behind him, and a milky white halo illuminated the dim church, exuding a sacred meaning. In the next second, Russell looked at the sluggish two and asked again, "So, what about yours?" Episode 126. Angels Come. Jesse was stunned to see the scene in front of him. As someone who grew up in a voodoo family, he knew that there was heaven and hell in the world. But this was the first time he had actually seen an angel. Especially the holy power gave him a sense of tranquility in his heart, which was always suffering. And even more shocked were the two angels of Fiore and de Blanc. As far as they know, except for the angel who was united with the devil, all the remaining angels in this world have no wings after coming to Earth. But it's not critical either. The point is that holy breath, something that belongs to God alone. "You are?" The short angel de Blanc unconsciously spoke respectfully. Russell withdrew his wings and did not answer, saying in a tough tone, "I want you two to take me to hell. I'm going to find someone." Fiore was extremely puzzled, with a skeptical look in his eyes. "According to the rules, angels cannot meddle in the affairs of hell, and why don't you go on your own?" Russell shook his head slightly and said regretfully, "It's a pity that the answer was wrong." In an instant, the space where the two angels were located, up and down, left and right, rolled like a Rubik's Cube, and dozens of pieces of minced meat fell to the ground in the blink of an eye. Fact, angel kills angel. This scene made Jesse feel more terrified than ever. He was very decisive, rolled his eyes, and fell to the ground with Cassidy, and pretended to die. But at this moment, two blue lights shone brightly. The two angels appeared intact, and then rushed towards Russell with a fearless face. "This is called revival?" Russell frowned slightly, feeling that something was wrong. This kind of harmless and costless resurrection cannot even be done by Lucifer himself. So how did the lower angels in such a lower world in front of him do it? Russell looked up, and the bursting laser once again split the two angels. Less than a second later, the resurrection reappeared. Then again and again, there was only a small hole left outside the church door that had been piled up with the corpse of the angel. The interest in Russell's eyes is getting stronger. After hundreds of killings, he found that he didn't even see anything abnormal. Without warning, without any power and soul transferred from the corpse, new life was born as if out of thin air. Interesting. Russell raised his hand and shook it suddenly, and in an instant, the two angels turned into plasma. In the next second, the blue glare lit up in an instant, and two pockets parachuted into it, locking the new angel inside. Then the flames slowly rose from inside. The two angels could only scream, feeling their consciousness blurred little by little. At this moment, two black rays of light burst out from Russell's eyes and submerged into the bodies of the two angels. This is magic from the Bone King, Life Fraud. Russell wants to trick the two angels into believing that he is really dead, and at the same time, the breath on his body becomes like a dead person. More than 10 seconds later, the two black scorched corpses fell quietly to the ground. In the next second, the blue glow rose again. Two identical angels have reappeared. Syllable. Russell snapped his fingers, and the black scab on the angel who should have died shattered. The two angels stood up with a confused look. 8 eyes for a while. The reborn angels stopped and looked at themselves on the other side, who should have died. And angels who are not dead cannot understand why a new self is born again. The world seems to have a bug at this moment. But seeing this scene, Russell laughed. He has already seen a hint of this world. Flames. Russell softly opened his mouth to pry the magic power, and suddenly, 2 blue magic arrays appeared on the heads of the 2 newborn angels. The next moment, fiery flames poured down from inside, burning the angel to ashes in the blink of an eye. And this time, it seems that the original angel is still alive and does not appear to shine. Humph, that's true. Russell turned his head to look at the 2 angels who had frozen, and said, "Why, do you still want to die?" This time it was very crisp, and the 2 days made shaking their heads at the same time. The reality could not be clearer. The newborn angel is not the original self at all. At this moment, for the first time, they felt what the fear of life really was. That was death. That was the great terror. Is there still a problem with taking me to hell now? Russell asked calmly. 2 days make shake his head again. Russell nodded and said with satisfaction, "Very well, lead the way." A few minutes later, Jesse and Cassidy, who were pretending to be dead, trembled and climbed up, watching the corpse mountain outside the church and the sea of blood completely frozen, and the 3 views were shattered again. A transit point on Earth. The 2-day envoy took Russell on the bus to hell. When passing a plane, the 2 angels stood up and the driver stopped the car. After getting out of the car, the short de blank explained, "The prisoners who are normally held are all in the prisons of hell, but the holy killer you are looking for is different. He was punished by God, and the real and eternal reincarnation was an endless suffering." Inside the tavern, a man with a calm face, but exuding incomparable ferocity, is slaughtering. Just yesterday, out of compassion, he gave up and went home to heal his wife and daughter directly with the medicine he had bought. But as a result, the person who wanted to save was the butcher, and he lost his horse as a result. When he walked back home, he saw hell on earth. His wife and daughter have been dead for a long time and are being eaten by crows. He witnessed everything, but he did not grieve, just went back and silently killed everyone in the tavern. This time, he showed no mercy. However, when she was the only one left in the tavern, everything turned into smoke. Once again, the tragedy starts from scratch. Just like that, one time at a time, the endless pain never ends. Bang! With a crisp gunshot, the last person in the tavern fell. Men quietly wait for a new reincarnation. But this time, the body did not turn into smoke, but the bar door behind him was pushed. The man turned around and found 3 complete strangers walking in. At this time, an indifferent voice came. "I heard that you are immortal. Is this really the case?" Bang! The man was expressionless, and raising his hand was a shot. The 2 angels threw themselves to the sides the moment they raised their hands, with extremely frightened looks on their faces. They couldn't understand why the angel behind them provoked the holy killer who didn't kill anything. But the next moment, there was no sound of the body falling. Instead, a crisp sound sounded from the ground. The 2 angels turned their heads and saw that a deformed bullet on the ground was shaking. "How is it possible?" The 2 envoys spoke in unison, looked back with a shocked face, and found that the mysterious one was still standing in place with an expressionless face. Not to mention the gunshot wound, not even a trace of destruction appeared on the body. "Who are you?" The Saint Killer's face changed slightly, and when he spoke for the first time, his voice was like a blunt knife frosting. But there is no answer. The corners of Russell's mouth slowly hooked, and flames suddenly appeared on his body, rising violently, and his flesh and blood disappeared. The next moment, as the scarlet flame chain fell to the ground, it made a crisp sound. The flame skeleton tilted his head slightly, and said in a tone with a sense of judgment, "I just want to ask, are you really not dead?" Episode 127. Angels with Divine Power. A demon wrapped in hellfire. When these 2 forces appear in the same person, the faith of the 2 angels is shaken, and the cognition is completely collapsed. They can't understand why darkness and light can be possessed at the same time. The Saint Killer also showed a surprised look. The other party had already shocked him by blocking one of his bullets at the beginning, but now, he clearly sensed that the other party had an angelic aura. But at this moment, he became an existence even more terrifying than a demon. However, this is still useless. The holy killer raised his pistol and lowered his head to gently blow on the hammer. Suddenly, the invisible force enchanted, and the hammer turned red, as if it had just been forged from the flames. Without any words, and without wanting to know who the other person is, the Saint Killer pulled the trigger directly. Bang! The timescale seems to be stretched at this moment. Flames slowly erupted from the chamber, and bullets with holy patterns spun and flew out, slowly but steadily pulling out a transparent trajectory. Russell's face was calm, and he walked forward slowly step by step, and did not raise his palm until he came to the bullet. He gently pinched the bullet, and suddenly felt that the blazing temperature was rapidly burning through his knuckles. Russell was surprised, because he saw the power of death in the bullet. It's really powerful. Even if I get hit to the point, it will definitely not be good. But, Russell sighed a little in his heart, but that's all. In a word, the other party is not a threat to him. Although this force is extremely powerful, the Saint Killer itself is like a baby with a gun. Don't talk about a rush like yourself. Even if you encounter a flexible and treacherous enemy, the Saint Killer may not be able to kill the other party. The reason why the Saint Killer looks invincible. One is because he has unparalleled lethality. The second is its own immortal characteristics. Although other strength and speed are far beyond ordinary people, they are completely average among superpowers. But is there really life that cannot die? Russell has not seen it. Even if the gods in the Marvel world die, when the universe dies, they themselves will die with it. Perhaps only the indescribable OAA, and the true God, can do it. But it definitely won't be a holy killer. At this time, looking at the gradually blackened finger bones, Russell's skull showed a hideous smile. The next moment, his thumb and index finger were slightly forced, and suddenly the hell flames burned. At the same time, it was at this moment that the scale of time returned to normal. The two angels felt a visual trance at the same time. When I fixed my eyes on it, I saw that Russell didn't know when to change his position. And even more terrifying, they saw that the other party actually grabbed the Saint Killer's bullet with his hand, and then melted into red molten iron with flames and dripped from his fingers and fell to the ground. Bang bang! In an instant, 5 bullets erupted from the revolver one after another, but a scene that was incomprehensible to the two angels appeared. At this moment, the trajectory of the 5 bullets became clearly visible, and then it seemed to enter the gel and slowly shot towards Russell at a turtle speed. How is this possible? The two angels spoke in unison. The Saint Killer also showed his eyes in disbelief. Russell casually said, "It's nothing, I'm just lengthening the spatial distance of this section." This is nothing? The tall angel thought it was a miracle, but the next second, he heard the other party speak again. But for a space master, there is more to it than that. The moment the words fell, Russell's palm twisted lightly in the air. The next moment, the space where the 5 bullets are located flips like a mirror. For the first time, the Saint Killer's eyes showed a terrified gaze, and then he threw himself to the side without hesitation. At the same moment, 5 bullets shot back at a terrifying speed. Bang bang bang! The wooden walls reveal 5 holes, and the last bullet burrowed into the right shoulder of the Saint Killer, and blood continued to emerge and stain the trench coat. The scalps of the two angels were shocked by this wave of operations. In less than 2 seconds, the Saint Killer was almost killed by his own bullet. "Who are you?" The Saint Killer rolled and stood up, ignoring the pain, and pulled out the long knife at his waist. This time, the calm on his face had long disappeared. His expression was solemn, and his eyes were full of shock. Russell tilted his head slightly, and a burst of scarlet Mars erupted from his mouth and laughed. "Whether the sin deserves it or not. Do you remember the name of any of the people you've killed? So, accept the trial. For killing the Saint Killer, even if he kills the protagonist group, Russell will have no burden in his heart. There is not a good person among all the plot participants in this world." The Saint Killer's face was hideous and angry, and he stretched out his hand and swiped the blade, and suddenly, the long knife turned into a fiery red. With a roar, he charged towards Russell's defenseless charge. Russell stood calmly in place. "Don't you understand the gap between me and who you met before? Since it's just a beast that gains power, let's stop here." The moment the words fell, Russell had already arrived in front of the eyes of the Saint Killer. The Saint Killer angrily wanted to chop down the long knife, but immediately felt that his hands were empty. He looked up and was shocked to find that the long knife in his hand was held by the other party at some point. Russell's icy voice sounded again. "You say, who is better than the strongest spear against the strongest shield?" The words fell, and a hot red line left an afterimage in the air. In the next second, Russell used his other palm to take off the scabbard on the Saint Killer's waist, took a step back and slowly retracted the knife. Duh! At the moment when the crisp sound of the sheath appeared, the stiff Saint Killer went from left to right, from top to bottom, split diagonally in 2 and fall backwards to the ground. Bang, stirring up a puff of dust. "It seems that the strongest spear has won," Russell commented lightly. The flames on his body disappeared, and the flesh and blood grew again. Then Russell stretched out his hand again, and the 2 revolvers and bullets on the Saint Killer's body suddenly flew into his hand. These 3 items are his purpose this time, because at present, only these few items in this world can kill the moody and ignorant god of life. Just in case, it's better to get your hands first. "Let's go." Russell motioned to the already a little frightened angels. The 2 angels quickly nodded, but then a majestic and angry voice sounded. "Kill my guards. Do you think you can still go?" Outside the wooden house, flames appeared on the ground, and then a humanoid monster with crimson skin and 2 horns walked out. He looked at Russell with anger, his eyes full of killing intent. "It's Satan," the tall angel said quickly, and then hid behind Russell with his companion. There was some disgust in Russell's eyes. Although he knows that Satan here is a garbage, but now, this garbage standing in front of him seems a little disgusting. simply in the title of Satan. The next moment, the wooden house instantly disintegrated, Russell's body floated, and slowly flew towards the sky with two angels, until Satan on the ground turned into a small dot. Russell stopped his body. He picked up the Saint Killer's pistol and raised it to his mouth, gently blowing the death power of the Bone King. The ram of the revolver once again turned red, like hot cast iron. Immediately afterwards, the demonized flame of the spirit of vengeance rose. The scarlet hideous pattern on the pistol began to spread. One after another spikes bulged with cold light. The barrel was extended, and the front sight turned into a skeleton of burning flames. The world doesn't need hell. Russell looked down at the earth, said softly, and pulled the board machine. Episode 128. The hideous skeleton's eyes erupted with a strong red glow, and a scarlet flame flower bloomed at the muzzle. On the ground, the strong hell Satan had heart palpitations in an instant. Instinctively, you want to escape, but at this moment, a tiny flame streaked against the tip of his nose and disappeared into the earth. Satan looked down and saw a tiny hole in the blue smoke in front of his toes. Didn't hit. That's it? Ha ha ha. Satan looked up and laughed maniacally, and at this level, he was also worthy of a holy killer's gun? He had been peeping at this weapon for a long time. Although I don't know how the three people on the opposite side killed the Saint Killer, they will definitely pay a terrible price. From the other party's shaking hands, it can be seen that he definitely has hoped to obtain those weapons today. His eyesight was excellent, and at this time, he had already seen the two angels looking at him, revealing a thick look of horror. Oh, already scared? Satan was instantly satisfied and enjoyed the fear of the angels. It's so much more fun than torturing those souls. But within 2 seconds, he immediately noticed something was wrong again. The guy who shot him, why is he looking at his gaze as if he is looking at a clown? Profanity, Satan sneered, and a flaming javelin appeared in his hand between raising his hand. But just when he wanted to cast, suddenly, an indescribable horror appeared from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, he couldn't even understand what was happening. Wrong. Satan looked at the two angels again. It's still a frightened gaze, but in fact, the gaze is not looking at itself at all. They look at their feet. Satan felt something in his heart and looked down. Suddenly, a scarlet light appeared from that small hole, carrying an aura of destruction. And from the perspective of two angels, the vision is more than that. I saw that in the earth visible under the horizon, all the gaps were gradually emerging with red light, and they were getting stronger and stronger, until the last huge skeleton face appeared on the ground, slowly revealing a hideous and terrifying smile. Then, the earth began to crumble. It's like the mythical day of doom. Everything began to collapse, as if swallowed by the abyss. In just a few seconds, the entire plane completely disappeared, revealing the boiling magma world below. This scene made the two angels tremble and become even more frightened, because they know that the real institution of hell is under the plane, and now it has been completely destroyed. The world doesn't need hell. It turns out that the man in front of him really didn't have any exaggerated words, and he destroyed hell with one shot. And just then, the second gunshot appeared. Satan, who was struggling in the magma, instantly exploded into a blood mist, and then was swallowed by the magma. Russell shook his head slightly. He estimated that this defective product should be made by God here. Too rough and too weak. At this moment, the short angel trembled and said nervously, "Sir, the bus back to the human transit station was destroyed by you, and we can't go back." He didn't blame Russell for this. On the contrary, he is afraid that the other party will blame him for not reminding him in advance. But at that time, he did not dare to speak at all. Russell said calmly, "No problem, this place doesn't need that car anymore." After speaking, he gently swiped his finger in the space in front of him, and suddenly a crack appeared. And opposite, it was the previous church. Jesse and Cassidy, who were frantically destroying corpses, froze violently. Then he watched the three angels before him walk out of a fiery red world. Pass by and leave by yourself. But 10 minutes later, the footsteps disappeared. Cassidy finally came to his senses, swallowed his spit, looked at the closed mouth, and said, "Is that hell?" Jesse shook his head in horror. "I read in books in my grandmother's house that hell is not like that. It should be a gray world and prisons built underground." Cassidy retorted with a confused look. "But didn't they say they were going to hell before?" When the words fell, the two seemed to think of something and looked at each other, and they both saw the horror in each other's eyes. As a preacher, Jesse sat on the ground at once and instinctively muttered, "My God, that man turned that place into a real hell. For the sake of taking me to hell, you two can go. However, I do not advise you to go back to heaven." Outside town, Russell suggested. The tall angel first showed a look of joy, and then wondered, "Although God is missing, angels should only live there. We have nowhere to go." Russell shook his head. "No, soon there won't be there either." A plain sentence, but it almost scared two angels to death. They recalled Russell's words again. The world doesn't need hell. And now, although the other party did not say, they already understood what the other party meant. That is, like hell, this world does not need heaven either. We see, the two angels did not dare to resist in the slightest, and lowered their heads in unison. When they raised their heads again, they found that there was no longer the figure of each other in front of them. The two glanced at each other, then left in one direction at random. In the fear of life, it seems that the missing God is no longer worthy of continued faith. Holy Grail organization. It sounds like a community that believes in God, but in essence, it is an organization that has captured the bloodline of saints and wants to destroy the world with nuclear bombs. They even imprisoned a real angel. But what's even more ridiculous is that all of this is actually God's plan. It was God who planned all this in order to cleanse humanity and then make the new species walk on the ground. As for the reason, God loves to be loved, but now the foolish creation of human beings is less and less grateful and praised. So, just like destroying dinosaurs, he wants to destroy humanity again. Late at night, inside the Grail branch, Mr. K is looking at the information sent by his subordinates. It was about the constant explosion of priests on the news. It has been verified that this seems to be caused by a power mismatch. Boring money fraud, shoot this member tomorrow. Mr. K had no faith at all, but joined for the sake of power and money. At this time, looking at the report, I suddenly thought that it was fake. Actually, it's true. Suddenly, a second voice appeared in the room, and Mr. K looked up in panic, only to find that it was a strange young man sitting opposite him. Mr. K turned to look at the door, but there was no sign of opening it at all. He didn't know how the other party sneaked in, but he didn't panic. Do you know where this is, young man? Mr. K showed majesty, and a one-eyed sinister threatened. As long as I shout, you will never be able to leave here. He thought that the threat would be at least a little useful, but he immediately saw the other party raise his palm to signal him to speak. Ignorant. Mr. K sneered and wanted to shout, but he couldn't make a sound at all. He trembled and reached out to touch it, and suddenly found that it was smooth. His mouth is gone. Episode 129. 3 days later, in the laboratory of the Holy Grail branch, a large number of mentally disabled clones Messiah were lined up to bring in, and a strange machine was placed in the center of the room. Mr. K stood behind Russell and said, "Adult, according to your requirements, the testing instrument has been prepared and can be tested." Russell nodded. Then a Messiah was brought over and tied to one of the two depressions of the instrument. The next moment, Russell pawed into the space in front of him, and it suddenly became transparent, and the Genesis, which was struggling violently, was taken out. Then he did not hesitate to stuff into the body of the Messiah. In an instant, the Messiah showed madness and let out a scream of pain. Russell's expressionless palm reached out and took Genesis out of the other party's body again. Then one Messiah after another was put into the machine and then stuffed into the book of Genesis. Finally, the 138th Messiah is safe and sound after parasitic Genesis. Russell's eyes lit up, and finally waited for the other party. Next, a group of people took the Messiah away and began to extract souls. The process is very simple, and the Holy Grail organization has soul merchants who specialize in this line of work. Soon, 1% of the soul of the Messiah, who matched the power of Genesis, was taken out and placed in front of Russell. Russell did not inject the original cell fluid into the body as in the original plot, but put 1% of the soul into a glass test tube in the instrument. The next moment, Russell uses the tiger charm to separate himself from good and evil. Enter the two grooves of the instrument separately, and then use the Bone King's magic to change the good and evil value at the same time. When the frequency was exactly the same as shown in the instrument, one of the Russell began to hold the Genesis and absorb it. This is the condition for using Genesis, both good and evil, and also conform to constant values. As for why Jesse the missionary was not directly arrested, one is because there are qualified clones in the Holy Grail organization. The second reason is that this machine can only be made by the Holy Grail organization, so there is no need to run again. And this time, unlike parasitism, Russell wants to use extract magic to completely devour and absorb this power. As time slowly passed, there was no resistance in Genesis. When the transparent mass disappears completely, the two bodies of good and evil automatically merge with the thought. At the same time, the modified good and evil values are automatically restored. Russell silently perceived, Genesis has been completely transformed into his power, and there is no anomaly due to the change in the value of good and evil. Then the next step is the experiment. Russell looked at everyone with a slight jaw, and at this moment his voice became majestic and grand. On your knees. In an instant, everyone knelt down with solemn expressions, as if devout believers had seen God. Then came some more orders, and everyone still did so without hesitation. Russell nodded in satisfaction. The weapon of the Holy Killer, the power of Genesis. Next, he can go to the missing God. Russell's purpose is simple. That is to kill God as the source of this world. See if you can make the world abnormal, or there is a shock, so as to teleport back to the DCU world. At least his portal can't open two universes at the moment. New Orleans. Russell calmly walks through the crowds, where there are dozens of jazz pubs on both sides of the long street. In the original plot, God is here. Russell withdrew his magic and instead amplified the fluctuations of Genesis power. Then he searched for the past one by one. When entering the third bar, Russell asked the same thing again to the front desk. I'm looking for God, have you ever met him? Of course. The bartender raised an eyebrow, giving a look I understood. Then he quickly walked with Russell God mysteriously towards the basement floor. It wasn't until after entering the innermost part that the bartender knocked on the door. The door opened, and on the huge sofa a woman held a male jay wearing a Dalmatian holster. 1,000 to watch the show, 4,000 to play, but the dog posed to 12,000. Russell casually took 3 or 4 piles of bills from his pocket and threw them out the door. You can get out. The bartender immediately made a look at the woman, and then the two ran out happily and closed the door intimately. The sound was isolated, and the room suddenly fell silent. Russell looked at the cosplay dog man in front of him and smiled. The flip of the dog is God. Gee, I have to say that the owner of your bar is really a genius. So, this Mr. God, can you first kneel for me to learn how to bark a dog? The dog man didn't make any movement, but a pair of eyes looked at Russell with anger. Russell sat back casually in the void, cocked his legs and smiled. Why, are you wondering if Jesse came looking for you? Or wonder why I recognize you? Yes, the person in front of you is the missing God. The dog man remained motionless, and a puzzled voice came out of his mouth. Who are you, and why didn't I see you in destiny? According to the fate he set, it should be Jesse who came this time. He wanted to have a bad taste to see if the missionaries could recognize his lord, but now, everything has changed. Russell shook his head slightly. Unfortunately, that's not what I want to hear. In the next second, Russell's eyes changed, and his voice became majestic and grand. Now, kneel down and learn how to bark. The dog man's body instantly stiffened, and then he mechanically stood up from the squatting position, and then knelt on the ground and barked in his mouth. Russell did not mean to lift the power, but asked curiously, shouldn't God be all-powerful? Wasn't this world created by you? If that's the case, why can't you, as God, resist the power of Genesis? This sentence also carried power, and the dog man suddenly spoke. I can. I can't. I can. I can't. For a while, the dog man kept repeating these two sentences, and it seemed that Russell's question really had two answers. Syllable. Russell snapped, and the power of Genesis withdrew. God stood up in an instant, pulled off his hood, and looked at the stranger on the other side in amazement. Not because the other side controls themselves with Genesis, but issue. The question just now made him suddenly fall into some indescribable state, or more seriously, incomprehensible, contradictory. Russell suddenly laughed. At this moment he was extremely sure that he was closer to the truth of this world. The next second, he used the power of Genesis again and spoke. Kill yourself, Mr. God. Episode 130. How would God kill himself? Did he die from poison, from flooding, from fire, or from sharp weapons, from physical decay? This seems like a paradox, because God does not die. But the next second, Russell really saw how God died. His eyes suddenly brightened, and his body bloomed with the purest white and most fiery light in the world. The whole room turned into a white world for a while, but this process did not last long. After more than 10 seconds, the light suddenly rolled upside down, collapsing inward like flowing water into a bright spot. Until the end, this bright spot flickered and completely disappeared. Russell thought thoughtfully. He speculated that God's suicide was to trace himself back to nothingness before birth, and to die in disguise. But that's not what Russell was expecting. He looked up and waited quietly. Sure enough, 2 seconds later, a white glare flashed, and God appeared out of thin air. A look of certainty appeared in Russell's eyes. His guess is true. God, like angels, will be revived. That is to say, God is also made, like a clone with all memories. In other words, God and angels are all programs that can be copied, and death is the switch. And only the weapons of the Holy Killer can completely kill this procedure. At this point, Russell can finally determine that this world is completely made by some being. So, is this a laboratory, a cage, or something else? But anyway, all he had to do was get out. And opposite Russell, God looked incredible at this time. He obviously knows the angel's secret, because that's what he said. But now it seems that it is only what he thinks. God, who has always been keen to be loved by his own creation, is extremely broken at this moment, because it is nothing more than someone else's creation. Just then, he heard the sound of the blade coming out of its sheath. God looked up, and suddenly his eyes were full of horror, and he said incredulously, "Why is the weapon of the Holy Killer in your place?" Russell raised his long knife and pointed it at God. "It is better to live falsely than to die. Just let me give you a ride." God shook his head madly, his eyes turned white, and he was about to run away. But then, the grand voice came again. "On your knees." God threw himself heavily on his knees, completely unable to resist. "Let me go, I'll give you the place of God." At this moment, God is no different from mortals before they die, and he begged madly. Russell had a smile on his face. Confused, the position that killed you is also mine. Murderous, God's eyes are full of despair. In the next second, the long knife slashed through, and a big head rolled on the ground. This time, without revival, God just opened his eyes and died completely. Russell did not have any special emotions about killing God. When he acquired the Genesis and Saint Killer weapons, it was a foregone conclusion. He's waiting right now. It stands to reason that being killed as the strongest God should change a little in this constructed world. But more than 10 seconds passed. Russell did not perceive any abnormalities, and the world was still stable. Is it something wrong, or am I guessing wrong? Russell frowned slightly in thought, and after a moment, his eyes lit up. He suddenly remembered that in this world, there is still an important special structure that has not been destroyed. Heaven. There is also a lot of God's power there. Heaven. A large number of angels in the temple are persecuting a soul that looks like God. God is missing, but they cannot let the world know and create illusions to deceive believers who can pray to heaven. Syllable. Suddenly, a headless corpse fell in the center of the temple, attracting the attention of all the angels. They felt that this body seemed to be a little serious. Syllable. Another ball fell, then tumbled to the feet of the soul who was being photographed. He picked up his head and said a little strangely, "Why does it look so familiar?" Below, a group of angels watched in horror as the false god held the head of the real god. God. He's dead? God is dead. That false god finally found out the reason and shouted out madly. In an instant, the faith of all the angels collapsed in an instant, and then they burned with screams one by one. After a few seconds, all that remained in the temple was a false god and piles of black ashes. It's really a bunch of inferior products. Russell emerged from the air and pulled out the revolver around his waist. The next moment, the flame pattern bloomed again. Under the power of terror, heaven no longer exists. After destroying heaven, Russell looked surprised. Because there is still no abnormality. No, there is still something unusual. The seat of God is still standing intact in place. Very obviously. Russell's heart moved slightly, and the next moment he sat up with feelings. In an instant, white light appeared. Russell could see nothing but white. I don't know how long later, the light dimmed again. Russell opened his eyes to find that the scenery around him had changed drastically, and he was sitting in a chair in the Batcave. He turned his head and saw Constantine lying on the ground. Bruce Wayne shook his head slightly, and seemed to feel a little dizzy in space. Russell frowned slightly. He could see that this was the moment when Lucifer lifted the mirror space after he left. Did I encounter illusion? Russell touched his waist, and the two revolvers of the Saint Killer were still there. It's not a dream. I really went to the world of missionary once. But what is the being who sent himself over? This experience was completely undangerous and rewarding. Russell has always believed that any gift in the world is secretly priced. Even Gui, who was very good to himself, told him clearly. The main reason that helped him become the Lord of Dimensions was to make him able to fight against Sithorn in the future. But for what? Sure enough, it's still the depth of the DC world. Russell sighed a little, and then walked up to Constantine and patted it. When thoughts don't go well, there must be an outlet for you, right? Playing dead, Constantine looked up tremblingly, and then saw a familiar sandbag-sized fist. Don't punch in the face. Yes. At the bar of light, a slightly chubby old man in a suit walked in. Above the stage, the man who was playing the piano and flirting with the girl suddenly showed a surprised look. He pushed away the woman beside him, walked to the old man's side, and said with some helplessness, "I've only been on vacation for less than a week, and it's only half a day in hell, so you're in a hurry to find it." As for, old man, yell, it's not like that. I'm also on a vacation, just in time to stop by to see you. Lucifer was suddenly even more surprised, but he didn't ask why, just showed a seductive smile in the next second. Do you want me to find you two good ones? Fuck off, mix me a glass of wine, you want to do it yourself. After speaking, the old man went straight to the second floor. City of Silver. Archangel Michael felt like he was going crazy, and the divine power in his body was turbulent. But she didn't dare to make any unusual appearances, because God is missing.